A man returns home to find his apartment completely empty, his belongings gone. His life upended only to discover his ex has orchestrated an elaborate and chilling game of revenge, and it's only just begun. It had been a few months since I broke up with Sarah. Our relationship had been full of ups and downs. Looking back, I realized I was mostly trying to avoid the inevitable for a long time. I thought we both knew it was over, but somehow I still felt a little guilty. It wasn't like I didn't care. It's just, well, I had to move on. So when we agreed it was done, I figured that would be it. But things didn't feel normal. Not for a while. The weeks after the breakup were strange, sure, but nothing out of the ordinary. I'd hang out with friends, focus on work, all the usual stuff. But then one night, everything changed. I had just gotten home from work, and when I opened the door to my apartment, I froze. Nothing was in there. I mean nothing. No couch, no coffee table, no bookshelves or TV. It was like someone had taken everything. I was standing in the middle of this bare, echoey room, not sure if I was hallucinating or if I had just walked into the wrong place. I checked the address again, thinking I must have gone to the wrong floor. But no, this was definitely my apartment. I pulled out my phone, thinking about calling Sarah, but the moment I saw her name pop up, a knot formed in my stomach. She had been acting off ever since we broke up. At first, I thought she was just sad, and I'd been patient with her. But there had been moments, little things that didn't sit right, texts that didn't make sense, a few unannounced visits trying to catch up. I brushed it off. Maybe she had come by and taken everything like revenge or something. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but honestly, what else could explain it? I called her. No answer. I texted her. Hey, what's going on? Why is everything gone? I waited. No response. I went over to the kitchen, figuring I could grab a bottle of water or something. But when I opened the fridge, it was empty too. That's when I noticed something on the counter. A note. It was written in her handwriting, but not a single word made any sense. The game is only just beginning. Don't worry, you're being watched. Every step, every move. But it's all for you, darling. You'll understand soon enough. I just stood there staring at it, trying to wrap my mind around it. What the hell did that mean? I went to the bedroom, hoping to find anything familiar. Maybe a jacket or a pair of shoes. But the closet was completely empty. Even my bed was gone, as if it had never existed. Just an empty space where I had spent so many nights. I almost felt like I was in a different world entirely. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone again, ready to call her again, but I hesitated. Something about all this felt calculated, like she knew exactly how I would react, what I would do. I went online, started digging into the past few weeks, trying to make sense of this bizarre situation. And that's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. A pattern. There were messages, comments, social media posts, all cryptic but somehow connected. Sarah had been planning this for weeks. Every conversation we'd had, every time I thought she was just being dramatic, she was setting something up. It was like she knew how to manipulate me into thinking I was the crazy one. The more I dug, the more I realized how deep she had gone. This wasn't just about a breakup. This was her final move, her last way to control me. And I had fallen for it. My chest tightened. I was living in a nightmare, but it was real. Every part of my life, every comfort, every corner of my existence had been invaded. I started to panic, thinking about all the places she might have been hiding, all the ways she could be watching me. I didn't even know if I was alone anymore. And then I remembered something, that last message. You'll understand soon enough. Suddenly it hit me. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun. And I had no idea how far Sarah would go to make me pay for the breakup. A breakup that seemed clean turns into a nightmare when Mark's obsession unravels. He's been watching, tracking, and manipulating her life. He vanishes without a trace, but she's left with the terrifying feeling that he's still out there, always watching. I thought the breakup with Mark had been clean. After months of emotional distance, we had sat down one night, talked it through, and parted ways. It wasn't a messy ending. No shouting, no accusations. Just two people realizing they weren't meant to be. We agreed we'd still be friends, though I wasn't sure if that was something I even wanted at the time. But I quickly learned that some people don't know how to let go. I was relieved at first, honestly. The tension had been building for weeks, maybe months. Mark had been acting distant, and I had too. I wasn't sad to see it end, but I also wasn't expecting the aftermath to be so strange. At first, it was just the usual post-breakup stuff. He didn't call, I didn't call. I went out with my friends, got back into my routine. But after a couple of weeks, I started noticing things that made me feel uncomfortable. Like little breadcrumbs, leading to something I couldn't quite put together. It started with the text messages. They were innocent at first, just random "how are yous" or comments about stuff we used to do. Then it started getting weird. I'd get messages at all hours. Things like, "I saw you at the coffee shop today. How's everything?" And, "I thought I saw you with someone at the park. You look happy." The thing was, I hadn't been to the coffee shop or the park, at least not when he said I had been. I had started to feel like he was watching me, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I blocked him on everything. Facebook, Instagram, my phone. I figured that would be the end of it. But then, about a week later, I got a call from his sister. She sounded off, like something wasn't right. "I haven't heard from Mark in days," she said. "I'm really worried about him. Have you heard from him?" That hit me weird. I hadn't heard from him, sure, but I hadn't really thought anything of it. After the breakup, I figured he just needed space. But his sister's voice was shaky, and I could tell something was wrong. "I haven't heard from him either," I said. "Why don't you try his place?" "I have," she replied. "But he's not answering. His door's locked, and the neighbors haven't seen him." Something about it felt wrong. I don't know why I thought this, but I had a strange feeling that I needed to check on him. Maybe I was still holding on to the past, but I felt responsible. So, against my better judgment, I decided to go to his apartment. When I got there, something didn't sit right. The place was too quiet, too still. The lights were off, the shades were drawn, and the air smelled stale, like it hadn't been touched in days. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. My heart was starting to race. I don't know why I thought I'd get a good response. He'd been acting weird before, but this was different. I called his name through the door. No reply. Then, almost instinctively, I grabbed the spare key he'd given me when we were still together and let myself in. What I found inside stopped me dead in my tracks. Mark was sitting on the floor in the living room. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated, and his face was pale. He was shaking. His clothes were dirty, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He barely even acknowledged me when I stepped in. It was like he was in a trance. I rushed over to him, trying to get him to respond. "Mark, are you okay? What's going on?" He didn't say anything at first, just stared at the wall. Then finally, he muttered something under his breath. "She's gone." I leaned in closer, confused. "Who's gone?" He looked at me, his gaze hollow. "Her. She left. I couldn't stop her." I didn't understand what he meant at first, but the panic in his eyes made my stomach churn. He was terrified, that much was clear. I tried to get him to explain more, but he just kept repeating the same thing, over and over. "She left. I couldn't stop her. I'm sorry." That's when it hit me. I thought about how he hadn't been himself for a while, how he'd been acting strange toward the end of our relationship, how he'd become increasingly jealous and paranoid. I didn't want to think it, but the thought kept gnawing at me. Was he talking about me? I wasn't sure what to do. I helped him up, tried to get him to drink some water, and we sat together in silence for a while. But the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That feeling grew worse when I noticed things in the apartment that didn't make sense. I found old messages on his computer, messages that weren't just from me, but from other women I didn't know. And as I dug deeper, I realized that something much darker was going on. I found photos of me that I hadn't noticed before, pictures I hadn't taken, from angles that didn't make sense. Mark had been keeping track of me even after we'd broken up. I also found something that made my stomach twist. He had been sending messages to my friends, making them doubt me, spreading lies. But what really threw me off was what I found in the drawer of his desk, a list of names, dates, and addresses. I couldn't help but feel like I was looking at a map, like he'd been mapping out my every move. Mark wasn't just devastated by the breakup, he was obsessed. He'd been keeping track of me, manipulating my relationships, and I realized he'd been planning something terrible. When I tried to confront him about it, he broke down. He was almost incoherent. I never wanted to lose you. I couldn't let you go. I was trying to fix it all. I thought if I just stayed close enough, you'd come back to me. It was chilling. The man I had once loved had turned into someone I didn't even recognize, someone I was scared of. I never saw Mark again. He was never heard from after that day. I called the police, but they didn't find anything to go on. He had disappeared completely. They said he probably just left town, started over somewhere else. But I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there. A part of me is convinced that he's been watching me every step of the way, lurking in the shadows, always one step behind, always ready to show up when I least expect it. I still get strange messages every now and then, though they're from numbers I don't recognize. And every time I hear a knock at my door, my heart skips a beat. I never answer.